The wind off Lake Michigan tasted like metal and ice. The morning Arthur Bellamy pressed his forehead to the diner window and wondered, for the first time in 43 years, whether anyone would notice if he vanished. He was 78, widowed, and had grown so quiet that even the birds outside the lakeside cafe no longer scattered when he shuffled past. Inside, the waitress left his coffee black. No one asked anymore if he still took 2 sugars. Outside, the snow hissed along the curb like static. Arthur's reflection stared back at him. A thin coat, a thinner smile. Eyes that had once danced with his late wife Eleanor. Now, only flickering with the question, how long before I'm just another empty chair at the counter? Then, a gloved hand tapped the glass beside his cheek. Through the frost, a young woman, maybe 28, cheeks red from wind, held up a small white box tied with red yarn. She mouthed 3 words Arthur couldn't hear, but the shape of them looked like, "It's for you." He blinked. She set the box on the windowsill, smiled once, and walked away. No name, no explanation, just footprints swallowed by fresh snow. What would you have done in that moment? Opened the box, run after her, or stayed frozen in disbelief? Arthur's fingers shook as he untied the yarn. Inside lay a single slice of cinnamon apple pie still warm from somebody's oven, and a note written in looping blue ink. "To whoever needs this today, because someone once gave me pie when I felt invisible." Arthur pressed the note to his chest, so hard the paper crinkled like a heartbeat. 3 days earlier, Arthur had begun a routine he called ghost walking. Every dawn he left the pale blue house on Maple Street, walked 3 blocks past the shuttered feed mill, cut across the Methodist church lot, and ended at the lakeside cafe, always ordering the same small coffee he rarely finished. He spoke to no one. No one spoke to him. The town of Cedar Cove, Michigan, had shrunk around him the way wool shrinks in hot water. Neighbors he'd known since Eisenhower now hurried past with quick nods, as if grief were contagious. At home, Eleanor's ceramic rooster still crowed on the kitchen wall, but the house smelled only of silence and unwatered geraniums. Arthur's daughter, Laura, lived in Seattle 3 time zones and a lifetime away. He had not asked her to visit for Christmas. She had not offered. Every night he arranged 2 plates on the table out of habit, then washed the second plate clean of its loneliness. After the pie, Arthur did something he hadn't done in months. He carried the empty box back inside the cafe and asked the waitress, Darlene, "Do you know the girl with the red scarf?" Darlene, 45, new heart-shaped glasses, tilted her head. Red scarf, blue coat? That's Riley. She works mornings at the bakery truck in the harbor lot. Why? Arthur lifted the box like evidence. She gave me this. Darlene's eyes softened. Then maybe you ought to say, thank you. She slid a fresh cup of coffee across the counter, this time with 2 sugars already stirred in, and refused his dollar. Arthur sat by the window until the sun burned the frost into teardrops. Then he walked the extra 6 blocks to the harbor. His knees ached, but the pie sat sweet and defiant in his stomach, as if apples could argue with despair. The bakery truck smelled like cardamom and new beginnings. Riley was wiping flour from her freckles when Arthur shuffled up. "I believe you misplaced this," he said, holding out the box. She smiled the same gentle smile. "Didn't misplace a thing. You looked like the right person." Arthur cleared his throat. "My wife used to bake cinnamon apple every Sunday. Haven't tasted it since." He couldn't finish. Riley's eyes glistened. "Then I'm glad the ghost let it through." She handed him another slice wrapped in wax paper, still warm. "On one condition, you eat it with someone within 24 hours. Deal?" Arthur swallowed. "I'll try." "What would you do in their place? Promise a stranger you'd share joy even when joy feels impossible." That evening, Arthur stood on his porch holding the wax paper packet like a fragile lantern. Across the street, Mrs. Delgado wrestled her trash can down the icy driveway. Arthur had never spoken to her beyond courteous waves. Tonight, he crossed the street. "Evening, Dolores. Could you use dessert?" She looked startled, then cautious, then reading something honest in his face. She laughed. "I could use company more." They sat on her porch steps and ate the pie straight from the paper, trading stories about arthritis, stubborn tomatoes, and spouses who now lived in photographs. When Dolores asked, "Who baked this?" Arthur answered, "A girl who believes leftovers can be love." They laughed so hard, Dolores snorted cinnamon. The next morning, Arthur woke to the unfamiliar urge to be useful. He found Eleanor's old wicker basket, lined it with a blue and white cloth, and walked to the bakery truck before sunrise. Riley handed him a steaming tray of day-old muffins without being asked. "Payment for yesterday's smile," she said. Arthur carried the basket to the bus stop, where 3 construction workers waited in frostbitten silence. He offered muffins. They offered jokes. By the time the bus arrived, Arthur's cheeks hurt from grinning. Day by day, the basket grew heavier, Riley sneaking in turnovers, scones, once a misshapen birthday cake. Arthur's route grew longer. The library steps where college kids studied, the nursing home lobby where residents smelled of peppermint and memories, the frosty playground where a single mom pushed her toddler on the swing while nursing a paper cup of coffee. Each hand that reached for a pastry brushed against Arthur's loneliness and pushed it a little farther away. What would you do with a basket full of second chances? One gray Friday, Arthur arrived at the bakery truck to find Riley locking up early. Her eyes were puffy. "Supplier raised prices again," she said. "Can't afford the lease past New Year's." Arthur felt the sidewalk tilt. "But you give half your stock away." "Yeah," she laughed without sound. "Turns out kindness doesn't pay rent." She tried to hand him the day's leftovers. He shook his head. "Not today. Today we sell." Arthur's mind raced back to Eleanor, teaching him how to waltz in their tiny kitchen, insisting, "Every problem has a rhythm. Find the beat." He found it at the town square gazebo. With Riley's permission, he set the pastries on an old card table under a hand-painted sign, "Pay what you can." He texted Dolores she brought her church bulletin. The construction workers from the bus stop showed with thermoses of cocoa. A teenage girl live-streamed the impromptu market. Donations trickled in through Venmo, handles scrawled on poster board. By sunset, the table was bare, and the cash box held 412.73 Canadian coin. Riley cried into her apron. Arthur patted her shoulder the way he used to pat Eleanor's when she burned the first batch of Christmas cookies. They weren't out of the woods, but they could see daylight through the trees. That night, Arthur sat at his kitchen table writing a letter to Laura. He enclosed a photo Riley had snapped of him laughing with a mouthful of blueberry scone. "Your mom would have liked this girl," he wrote. "She's keeping the pie tradition alive. Maybe you could come taste it sometime." He licked the envelope before fear could stop him. 2 weeks later, on the eve of Christmas Eve, snow fell thick as forgiveness. Arthur woke to headlights sweeping across his bedroom wall. Laura stood in the driveway, suitcase in hand, cheeks pink from cold and apology. Behind her, Riley unfolded a folding table marked Pop-Up Pie Shop. Neighbors poured out of houses carrying extra chairs and string lights. Dolores arrived with her famous flan. The construction workers built a makeshift plywood counter. The teenage girl set up speakers and played Nat King Cole. Arthur watched from the porch, heart thundering like he was 17 again. Riley spotted him and waved. "Bellamy, you're the guest of honor. Get down here." Laura met him halfway up the walk. "I got your letter," she whispered. "I didn't know how much you needed me until you asked." They hugged long enough for snow to settle on their shoulders like quiet blessings. The twist none of them saw coming. As Arthur cut the ceremonial first pie, Riley stepped back and let someone else take the knife. Her grandmother, a woman Arthur recognized the moment she smiled. 53 years earlier, Eleanor had brought a frightened, pregnant teenager into this very kitchen, given her cinnamon apple pie, and driven her to a shelter 2 towns over when her parents kicked her out. That teenager had been Riley's grandmother. She had raised Riley on stories of the kind woman with the rooster on her wall. Riley had moved to Cedar Cove 9 months ago, hoping to find the house with the blue porch light, but Arthur's sorrow had hidden him in plain sight. The pie on the windowsill had never been random. It was a thank you 50. 3 years overdue. Arthur's hands trembled as he handed the grandmother the first slice. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and said softly, "Eleanor's crust, no one ever made it flakier." Arthur laughed and cried At the same time, Laura slipped her arm through his. Riley snapped a photo. 3 generations linked by sugar, cinnamon, and the courage to show up. Later, when the lights flickered low and neighbors sang off-key carols, Arthur stepped onto the sidewalk. He looked up at the snow spiraling under the street lamp and felt Eleanor's presence not as a ghost of grief, but as a gentle warmth against his cheek. He whispered, "Thank you for sending them." A soft wind answered, rustling the string lights overhead like applause. What would you do if you discovered the kindness you received was rooted in kindness you once gave and forgot? New Year's Day, Riley's bakery truck reopened, this time with a small weatherproof sign painted by Arthur. Pay What You Can Fridays. Sponsored by the Bellamy Pie Fellowship. Neighbors took turns hosting the table. Every slice came with a story card tucked under the plate. Today's pie is in memory of Eleanor, who believed no one should eat alone. Arthur kept the wicker basket by the door, always ready. Laura extended her stay through the winter, helping him organize the cards. Some nights they Skyped Seattle grandchildren who wanted to learn the secret crust. Arthur would wink and say, "Love and very cold butter." One quiet evening in March, Arthur carried the basket to the lakeside cafe. Darlene, polishing coffee cups, looked up. "Seat's open, Mr. B." He placed a fresh slice on the counter. Cinnamon apple, of course. Beside it, he set a new sign. Free to whoever needs a reason to smile. A young man in paint-splattered coveralls hesitated, then took the slice and asked if he could sit. Arthur nodded. They talked about job hunting and missing mothers. When the young man left, his shoulders seemed broader, his step lighter. Arthur paid for the coffee he still rarely finished. As the sun dipped behind the lake, painting the sky peach and gold, Arthur walked home past yards bright with crocuses. He paused at the corner, where the girl in the red scarf had once tapped the window. The glass was clear tonight. No frost, no lonely silhouette. Inside the cafe, Darlene raised a coffee mug in salute.